An action system is an evolutionarily developed psychobiological system that organizes perception, emotion, cognition, and behavior towards a specific survival goal. We have daily life goals and defense goals. The daily life goals are tend and befriend, rest and digest. And the defense goals are the continuum of fight or flight. Examples of some of the defense action systems include when we orient to a startle response or novelty cue, the fight response and the flight response, also the freeze response, and the fawn or submission response, and collapse or shutdown or faint, as well as pain for analgesia. So the orienting or startle action response, orienting towards a novelty cue, can include sudden alertness, scanning the environment, hypervigilance, an exaggerated startle response, and trauma scanning for threat.
Brain networks.
The threat detection action system involves 3 parts of the brain, starting with the amygdala, which is the threat detection and fear response, represented here by a guard dog. And you can think of this part of your brain as the alarm system. Then we have the anterior insula, which is responsible for awareness of our internal body and emotional signals, represented by a cat. It is your inner body sensor. And the anterior cingulate cortex mentioned earlier is also involved in this action system. And again, it is responsible for attention monitoring and emotion regulation, represented by a hawk. It's your attention spotlight. The fight response includes anger, confrontation, attack, being controlling, rage parts, and aggressive protectors.
Brain networks.
Aspects of fight or flight relate to several parts of the brain. Again, the amygdala, which is the guard dog and your alarm system, starts us off. And then we have the basal ganglia, represented by a horse, and this area is responsible for selecting and initiating action patterns. So it's your autopilot movement system. Next, we have the brainstem autonomic nuclei, and that's represented by a jellyfish. And it's the area that controls autonomic bodily functions, and think of it as the system that keeps you alive without even thinking about it. And then we have the periaqueductal gray, PAG, represented by a possum, which coordinates defensive survival behavior. It's the instinctive survival responder part of your brain. And finally, we have the hypothalamus, represented by a lizard, and that area is responsible for activating stress hormones and body regulation, and it's the body's control panel. The flight response includes running away or the urge to do so, avoidance, the urge to leave, avoidance of trauma reminders, and panic escape behaviors. The freeze response can be described as tonic immobility, or the inability to move or speak. Somewhat paralysis can also be dissociative immobility and the inability to respond during conflict.
Brain networks.
In the freeze or collapse response, already mentioned, we have the basal ganglia or automatic movement system, represented by the horse, and the insula, responsible for interoceptive shutdown, in this case, represented by a cat, and the periaqueductal gray, the possum, who plays dead as an instinct for survival. The interoceptive shutdown from the insula can also be represented by a turtle pulling into its shell. And finally, the dorsal vagal pathways to collapse or shut down can be represented by a goat fainting as they do. And that's losing connection with your body in a way. Examples of submission or the fawn response is overly compliant behavior, appeasement, fawning, people-pleasing, and fear-based compliance. Examples of collapse or shutdown include fainting, or emotional shutdown, or dissociative collapse, or what is referred to as dorsal vagal shutdown, or vasovagal syncope, numbness, and dissociative detachment. Pete Walker's contribution on fawn response describes excessive people-pleasing, over-apologizing, self-blame, suppressing one's needs, and toxic shame as the emotional core of complex PTSD. Examples of pain for analgesia include reduced pain perception, emotional numbing, lack of pain awareness during trauma, and emotional anesthesia. Shame is not a single action system. It involves a combination of the fight response with externalized blame, or the flight response with perfectionism to avoid shame, or the freeze response, withdrawal due to shame, or the fawn response, self-blame and appeasement. So shame tends to drive the fawn submission strategy, but it also appears in other states like freeze. Shame involves the submission response, shame about self, and appeasement or people-pleasing, and the freeze response of hiding and withdrawal. In trauma, shame often becomes a chronic internalized state, especially in developmental trauma. Shame is displayed through lowering of the gaze, shrinking posture, apologizing, appeasing, withdrawing, and hiding, with the goal to reduce threat from a dominant or dangerous other. And again, shame is actually very important in this framework, but it's a bit tricky because shame is not itself an action system. Shame acts as the emotional signal that activates submission behavior. So its evolutionary function is to prevent aggression from others, maintain group membership, and signal recognition of social hierarchy.